Welcome to another episode in our series of personal empowerment audio programs, Finding Yourself in Paradise. Hi, I'm Michael Benner.
And I'm Steve Snyder. And our topic this week is on the middle way, the middle path. I kind of think of this as the Goldilocks syndrome. You know, that one's too soft and that one's too hard, but this one in the middle, this one's just right.
This is an ancient philosophy in terms of overall Eastern philosophies. It's certainly known around the world, but most people are not exposed to critical thinking in their schooling in such a way that they really understand the dangers of false dichotomies and either-or thinking, having to reduce everything to either true or false, and then the idea that all differences are opposites, that there's only two ways anything can be. Well, that comes largely out of fear and anxiety and can actually be used consciously by people who are trying to control you, to get you to think in a high-stress situation that everything's either black or white. Steve and I, we're going to open up the crayon box because there's rainbows in between.
And those rainbows are always in between the extremes, the black and the white, the either and the or. Either and or are often true. It is either that or that in some occasions, but just limiting yourself to that philosophy denies the existence of neither and both and other things as well. So we have to open up to the idea that, yes, there are times for the extremes, but that's not where we want to live. We want to live out of the extremes in a place in the middle. I was watching the opening game of the Lakers Western Conference Championship, and Phil Jackson was talking about how when it comes to the playoffs, you have to step it up a step, but what you have to do is stay, he said, in the middle path. He said, my mentor, Red Holtzman, who was the coach of the New York Knicks when he was a player many years ago, told Phil that in the playoffs, one loss, and it's really significant, so you can get real down, or one win, and you get real up, but you don't want to. You don't want to get too high or too low, because you lose your ability to be flexible when you get into the too much excitement or too much depression. You want to stay in the middle because that gives you access to all of your power.
And that's really core sports psychology, and it's only 35 or 40 years old now. I mean, don't we all remember in high school the Friday afternoon pep rally before the basketball game or the football game? Unfortunately, the tennis team, the golf team, the baseball team, they didn't get those. I would have played baseball instead of football, but there were no cheerleaders. So.
That was a major consideration.
It was. It turned out to be the major consideration, so I got beat up on the football field. So certainly we all had that experience because it works, and especially if you're in your home field or the special homecoming game, the psychology of the game is very, very important, and it had always been assumed that the more excited you get, the more worked up you get, the better your performance. Turns out that's only true to a point of so-called diminishing return, where too much anxiety is perceived by the body as fear and potential danger, and it starts to have a reverse effect. So we're looking for the peak of the curve, aren't we?
Yeah, indeed, because once we get stuck in the too high or too low place, we see the world through that lens. All of a sudden, like, everything seems to be too much, too exciting, everything seems to be too big or too difficult. And when we get depressed, everything seems too overwhelming or too much to handle. In the extremes, we lose our sense of perspective. We lose our sense of that some things are grand and some things are not so grand. Everything seems exaggerated to the negative or to the positive. So the ability to be flexible both in our viewpoint as well as in the way we respond to the things that come in, to the actions that we are perceiving. The way we respond depends a whole lot on the attitude that we have. And again, if we're too excited or too depressed, then that colors everything else.
It was really my parents' or maybe grandparents' generation that I heard speak of or read articles about the impact of Einstein's theory of relativity. And suddenly, all over the United States, Europe, and eventually the rest of the world, people were talking about the relative nature of things. And it shook up a lot of people who had a more absolute view of reality, like some things are definitely right, some things are absolutely wrong. It's either good, absolutely, or bad, Absolutely.
But when the very laws of physics get pulled into the question, then you can't say that anymore. I mean, when the basic premise of everything we believed in is not exactly as we've always believed, as Einstein proved, that the basic laws we understand that work slower than the speed of light change when you go faster than the speed of light. Everything else has to be called into question.
It was very inconvenient. We thought Newton had it down.
No, he had part of the equation, but
so the relative nature of things. So now in philosophy, we're generally more clear that if anything is absolute, it would have to be in the spiritual realm or the non-physical realm. For as far as the physical, dense, mechanical universe goes, everything is relative. Something might be 99.999% true or good or beautiful, but there's still that little tiny spot of the opposite. Like the yin and yang sign where you've got the 50-50, the ebb and the flow with that nice sine wave that goes through it, the wave that goes through the black and white symbol. But there's a spot of the opposite in each. And that's an indication that you can't get to 100%, that everything has some relative degree of merit. Some tiny little kernel of truth. Maybe it's 50-50, it might be 70-30, it might be 90-10, it might be, as I said, a very exaggerated 99.999. And the cynics always pop up and say, well, find me something good about cancer, or what's good about Hitler. And well, you don't begin there. You begin in the middle with a 60-40 or a 70-30. And how do we work this out? How can we... And Steve and I are going to talk about a variety of applications now, whether it's an argument you're having with a friend or a family member, or an internal struggle that you're weighing factors in your life, and you're coming from a true or false, black or white, nothing in the middle place, you're going to have a problem with that.
Yeah, it's hard to, if it's only right or wrong, it's hard to see anything in the middle if you're limited to those two choices. So what we're saying is in almost every situation, when something is right, it's got some wrong in it. And when something's wrong, it's got some right in it. And to see the other person's part of that, to find the place where you can agree, all of a sudden changes the nature of arguments. It's instead of it's you against me and one of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose and one of us is going to be happy and one is going to be unhappy, all of a sudden it's you and me together looking at this situation and coming up to some kind of consensus, realizing that we're not going to agree 100% on this, but I can see merit in your argument and you can see some merit in my argument, and we can agree to disagree, or at least agree to disagree without being disagreeable.
Well said, and I think that there's real leadership in that. The first person that is conscious enough to deliberately acknowledge some merit in the argument of their so-called opposition is going to have extraordinary power, because the other person is going to feel acknowledged and understood, and they're going to relax in their argument, and then you can move in and double down on that, you see. Again, we're looking for win-win situations. We're looking for resolution through harmony, and that's really what the ancient middle way, sometimes called the mystic's path or the third way, that's what it's all about. Because if you can find a 3 where most people only see opposites, then you can find a 4 and a 5th option and a 6th choice and a 7th alternative and an 8th way of looking at it, and that's the basis of a good liberal education and the basis of philosophy, which is a search for truth. I don't mean liberal in a political way, just a good, well-rounded understanding of truth coming in all these variations and shades and hues and saturations, and your truth may not be my truth in every situation. And if you want to take a position that some things are absolutely true and absolutely false or absolutely right or wrong, well, fine, take that position. But you can see, I would hope, the danger in applying that in all areas of life.
Yeah. For example, let's say that there's something that you want, a new guitar. I know Michael loves guitar. So let's say there's an issue of the quality of the guitar versus spending X amount of money, which means I don't get to have other stuff. So an extremist would have to have the best guitar regardless of the pain it caused in all the other areas of their life. That's why the middle path can be compromised without being compromised. You could get a great guitar, maybe not the very best guitar, and still have money left over for other kinds of pleasures. And maybe that middle path, instead of choosing to get no guitar at all or to get only the very best guitar, is a much more conscious way of living your life. It's a much more flexible way of living your life. Bob Dylan said, man is opposed to fair play. He wants it all and he wants it his way. You know, I think that's true. We have a tendency to just want it all regardless of the circumstances. But if we take a deep breath, we take a look inside what our higher self desires, it's not just the extreme of this and feeling like the lack of that. It's finding a way to have a little bit of it all, you know.
When I was a young fella, I read Mad Magazine. I just loved Mad Magazine. And
Let me worry?
one of my favorite reoccurring features of Mad Magazine was Spy versus Spy.
Oh, right. The black spy against the white spy, yeah.
And they were identical, and yet they were opposite. And therein was the paradox. How could they be so similar and yet absolutely opposite? Well, that's... You know, part of philosophy is understanding that paradox is usually where truth is found, in the really confusing stuff. And instead of just dismissing it, if you hang with it and let it sort of have its way with you, you're going to have really profound insight and understanding that can deepen and develop your ability to think critically, constructively, creatively, and all kinds of different ways. So consider that there is a difference between opposites and polarities, that opposites could not be more different. Polarities seem to be two sides of the same coin, so to speak, or the two ends of a bar magnet. They're ultimately part of one thing. Again, a philosopher could argue that even opposites are part of one thing, but see if you can get what I'm talking about. The opposites that reflect each other and yet could not be more different. You might look at politics for this, okay, and the enmity and hostility even that we see in domestic politics in the United States, or the tension in international relations. That's often cast as an either-or. Capitalism versus communism, or domestically Republicans versus Democrats. We also have the natural polarity of gender with men and with women. How opposite are they? Are they polarities? Are they part of the same thing as gender? Or are they truly opposites, one from Mars and one from Venus, so-called? If you play with just that little construct, I'm not sure you're going to come at any definitive, final understanding of it, but it's like mental calisthenics. It'll help you work with the truth and the paradox of opposites versus polarities.
So when you are looking at choices and you see the opposites of the choices, this is the very best and this is the very worst, you're not limited to those choices. You don't have to have the very best, because sometimes the very best comes with a price tag, be it fiscal or otherwise, that makes it not worth it. And you don't have to settle for the very worst either. It's the Goldilocks syndrome. Again, this one's too soft and this one's too hard, but this one's just right. If you look at the world from the point of view of this one's too much and this one's too little, but this is just right. Look at everything that way. I don't have to pay the most money and get the best thing. I don't want to pay the least money and get the worst thing. I'm going to find something that feels good on both getting a quality product and spending the right amount of money. I'm not going to need to live in the extremes when it comes to purchasing. I'm not going to need to live in the extremes when it comes to the people in my life. I don't have to hang out with only people who are perfect, nor do I have to find the bad boys or the people who are, troublemakers to hang out with. What I need to do is find people who generally have the values that I have, and I can learn some things from, and they can learn some things from me. Again, we're looking for something that feels comfortable, not so comfortable that it doesn't make us want to grow and succeed, but comfortable so that it doesn't make us feel like we're living in fear. When you go for the best or you're settling for the worst, there's so much fear in your life because you're way out of balance.
I think at the root of this, we really have to look at the impact of good versus evil as the first dichotomy or certainly a basic dichotomy that underlies a lot of the confusion that follows. That something, in order to be good, has to be absolutely good and cannot have any downside to it, much less evil. And vice versa, if it's evil, how could there be anything redeeming in it, anything worth saving? And yet in the real world, we see that there is the yin and the yang of things. There is good and evil in the world, but it also has an in-breath and an out-breath to it. The danger is being absolute about it. For example, we're going through this torture debate and debate around war in the United States of late. Here's an example of how we can get into trouble. There is still in this country is a push to excuse waterboarding and other forms of torture based on the intention behind it. But here's the problem. When you become just like the enemy to defeat the enemy, how could you defeat the enemy by becoming like the enemy? You see? So if we're willing to do what the enemy is willing to do, then we lose our moral authority. We lose that moral high ground. The idea that there's good pirates and bad pirates, or good bank robbers and bad bank robbers. What did Wanda Sykes say at the correspondence dinner the other night? Yeah, I robbed a bank, but look at all the bills I paid. I think it comes from this rigid presumption that because we're trained as children to look for good versus evil and to see life as some sort of battle between these two polarities, that therefore everything is either good, or bad, all bad, and then we carry that out to the point that we lose all these variations and permutations and combinations, all the variety is the spice of life. How about a little of this and a little of that? Or how about, this would be immoral in this situation, but it's certainly understandable in that situation. And so the third way, or the middle way, is a way of opening your mind up to consider the full range of options and possibilities in every situation.
And that really is what distinguishes humans from all the other creatures, is that we can do just that. The more we move toward the black or white either or, the more we're asserting our animal nature, essentially. It's the fight or flight syndrome. Animals live in that basic, it is good or bad. It's like you run or you stay. It's safe or it's not safe.
Shoot first, we'll ask questions later.
There you go. So when we're in that fear place, that am I in danger place, remember, we are descendant from the most paranoid. That is the people who lived before us that were feeling safe when it wasn't really safe. They got killed before they made babies. So the people that lived the longest, long enough at least to make babies, are our ancestors. So we have this natural tendency when we're confused to behave in such a way that we're like in danger, because our mind confuses confusion with danger. It thinks it doesn't know, so let's err on the side of shoot first, ask questions later. So that's when we move into that black and white kind of thinking, when we don't feel safe. So how do we get out of extreme kinds of thinking? How do we get out of this either or kind of mentality? And the answer comes back to the same thing we've been talking about in virtually all of our shows. It's focused passion. It's one slow, conscious, deep breath. It's stopping. It's becoming awake. It's becoming aware. It's becoming the higher self that it has choices.
Has choices. I was waiting to hear you say that very word. That's what we're really talking about. I have choices. You see, part of either or thinking or believing everything could be resolved by simply a true or a false answer. I mean, even in school, you had multiple choice and probably none of the above and all of the above. And then you had the test where you could write an essay. You have to have an opportunity to express yourself. And true or false leads to a belief that all differences then are opposites, that in all ways, every difference, every variation is an opposite. That means somebody who you love and who loves you could agree with you on almost everything in your life. But in one area, they agree in a significant way. Doesn't mean it's an opposite agreement. Doesn't mean they oppose you. It's just different. But if you're coming out of this high-stress either-or mentality, then all of a sudden, this should be a red flag for you. All of a sudden, this person that you love and care about, maybe a spouse, becomes opposite. And in opposition to you, they oppose you now. They're a threat. which adds to the stress that created the either-or, fight-or-flight thinking in the first place. And that's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, so it always comes down to one thing, and that is feel safe. When the danger's real, don't worry about it, because your autopilot will kick in and fight or flight will take over. If the danger's real, if there's real significant, life-threatening danger, you're going to run or hit or do what you need to do. It's learning to understand that all the rest of the time, which is that 99% of the time and much more than that, you aren't in danger. You are safe. And when you are safe, there's no great value in seeing things through the lens of black or white, either or, because it misses the rainbow. It misses all the other flavors. It misses those colors inside the box, And that's really what makes us fully human, is the ability to be full of the variety, the spice of life, the ability to do all kinds of different things, to be generalists and to be tapping into all kinds of knowledges and wisdoms that interest us. And we're curious beings. We want to know a lot about a lot of things. So we don't have to know everything about anything, and we don't have to know nothing about things. We don't have to be in the extremes. We can taste, we can touch, we can sample. And that's a wonderful part of life. So understand, the middle way is more than just a choice. It's a philosophy. It's a whole way of living life. It's staying focused, it's staying in passion, but it's staying out of, for the most part, severe depression and overwhelming excitement and over-the-top enthusiasm. It's staying in a place where you have choices.
And to get there and to stay there, you need a better model than either or. A simple way of saying this is to go from a you or me world to a you and me world. But let me offer another understanding that dovetails with what Steve has just explained here. April 23rd is St. George's Day. I know that my wife and I chose to be married on. It's also the birthday and death day of Shakespeare. And St. George was, or still is, I guess, the patron saint for England. And archetypically, St. George represents slaying the dragon, the victory of good over evil. All right. Well, we've already talked about why that may be a pretty good elementary basic model that's worked for the last few thousand years, but we need a more refined model now, because it's too easy to say, well, I'm doing bad things, but I'm doing them with good intentions, so I'm the good pirate and you're the bad pirate because you're different. It doesn't work anymore. So what would we use? What could we use as a alternative paradigm for St. George slaying the dragon, for good defeating and conquering evil? How do we grow that to a more mature and more accurate model? I think the way love vanquishes fear is a very good model, because St. George and the dragon, in a way, portray good versus evil as opposing forces. But love vanquishing fear is like light vanquishing darkness, or heat vanquishing cold, where the darkness and the cold are not opposing forces. Only semantically are they opposite. They're actually descriptions of the absence of the force. Dark is the absence of the light. Fear, the absence of the love. So you bring love to fear, or understanding to ignorance, and it's defeated by definition. There's no struggle. Nothing has to die. Nothing has to be overcome or overwhelmed. And I think that's part of the beauty of the middle way. What I love about it is that it is so true. The variable nature of truth itself, the, relative nature of truth itself as it works out in the world. Again, it could be very lopsided or it could be very down the middle. Truth is always relative as played out in the world. And that creates a lack of resistance. Truth doesn't have resistance, right? So find models where your truth is so true, so capital T, right, at least for you, at least in this situation, that the universe conspires to support you. And I think there's a feeling that we can carry over into that and practice demanding that in our lives, rather than settling for this medieval, one of us is right, one of us is wrong, and we'll shoot first and ask questions later, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it's important to evolve, you know. I mean, human beings can do that as a species, and we can all do that individually within our lives. For example, I had this almost black and white notion in my life that positive suggestions, positive visualizations are good, and negative visualizations are bad. You don't want to imagine what you don't want because that helps you create it. I just read something the other day that sort of opened my eyes on that one, that the positive power of negative visualization. And essentially what it was saying is, imagine, for example, that you were born in 1830 and you were a slave. And imagine what life would be like. Or imagine that you lost everything you have. Everything. You lost everything. And from the point of view of creating the ability to appreciate what you currently have, there's a lot of power in doing negative visualization, just to sort of like, whoa, what could it have been? You know, what if I was born not in the 20th century in America, but in the 10th century in Africa? You know, I mean, what would so I can see some value. Again, the little bit of the other inside the other. And so
the dot of the opposite.
Exactly.
As long as you don't stay with that
Exactly.
image.
Exactly. And you don't want to live in negative visualization, but to rule it out and to say it's always bad, again, that's the extreme. So open up to the idea of there's some merit in the other argument. There's some merit in the other's point of view. And open up to the idea of not needing it to be the best or the worst situation. That human beings do far better finding something in between. Not too hard, not too soft, just right. I think the middle way is finding things that are just right. And just right doesn't mean perfect, because perfect's not just right. Perfect's uncomfortable. Perfect's something you have to live up to. Sometimes it's much better to just be good instead of being great. Sometimes it's really important to do your very best and be great, but trying to live up to that 24/7 is impossible. So sometimes it's nice to find something where you can settle for darn good, because you don't really have to work that hard. I remember there were some classes I was really fine with a B. You know, the work it would have taken to get the A wasn't worth it.
Yeah, I use the affirmation in my own life. In my head, I will say to myself at times when I'm frustrated, hey, why isn't your best good enough? And often what comes back is, it is. And then I'm like, well, then why didn't I feel that way? Or how is it that I'm not clear that I'm doing my best and yet it's not enough? Now, I have a sense, again, that the universe conspires to support me most of the time when I'm clear at all. So that's the point where I just sort of turn it over to fate. You know, I've done everything I can do. Now, come see, come saw, whatever will be. I've done my best, and that's good enough. I think that's going to add years to my life.
Indeed, indeed. Like, if your best isn't good enough, then what do you do next? You know, what you do is you fret, you worry, you be concerned. And I think we've proven over and over again that worrying once is a very wise thing to do, to have an idea of what could go wrong and a plan for worst case scenario. But to worry as a constant habit is so absurd. I think the proof that it's illogical is that you can get sick and tired of something that's never happened yet. You know, that's ridiculous, isn't it? So when that's an extreme. Moving into seeing what could go wrong over and over and over again is not the middle way. That's a very extreme way. Just as it would be absurd to only imagine things always going right and never having any thought at all about what you would do if they didn't. We need to find a place that has some balance to it, and that's not in the extremes.
I had a teacher describe this as harmony through conflict. The idea of mediation, I think, really dances all around third way or middle way thinking, that we're not here to adjudicate. For example, in counseling, people have come to me for couples counseling over the years, often expecting Judge Wapner or Judge Judy, and I would tell them who's right and who's wrong, who's being good and who's being bad. And I say, no, it doesn't really work that way. You know, this is more about mediation. We want to create understanding and rebuild some rapport and connection in the relationship. And many people have a problem with that because their whole relationship has been seen as who's right. And I'm going to call my friends and put it to a vote, and the other partner in the relationship does the same thing. Well, my friends all say you're crazy. Well, now we've put it up for a vote, but we're still not arriving at understanding. Only when a mediator, a facilitator, a therapist, a counselor of some sort practices this idea of harmony through conflict, assigning each side the responsibility to find something of merit, some truth, some little piece of what the other person is saying that you disagree with so vehemently that you can agree with and acknowledge. Now the walls come down, and we can use the stones to build bridges where the walls once had been. I'll acknowledge that there is some merit in your argument here. And how do they respond? They go, well, Michael, as a matter of fact, that one point you made, I could understand how you feel that. It's not the way I feel, but all right, I can understand how you'd feel that way. Now we're starting to develop the rainbows in between the black and the white, a much more satisfying place to live.
Indeed, but that doesn't deny the existence of the black and the white in the rare circumstances. Sometimes, for example, if one spouse is saying, we need to hit the kid over and over again, spare the rod, spoil the child, and the kid says, no, I don't believe in corporal punishment. Those are two extreme views, and there's no middle ground that you can create in there. So sometimes there is the black and white, but to live your life there, to live your life in so rigid, so stuck, so perfectionistic that everything has to be perfect or it's not worth doing at all, there's no beauty in that kind of a life. That's a very regimented, almost robot-like existence. Part of the beauty of being human is making new mistakes and learning from them. It's experimenting. It's being curious and satisfying your curiosity. It's trying new things. And it's understanding that there is room in your world for the extremes. There is room for them, but that's not where you want to live. Where you want to live is not too hard, not too soft, just right.
I get an image of a football field, American football field, with the end zones. And the end zones, you can't play a game. The end zones are every much as out of bounds as being beyond the sidelines. You're off the playing field. You score when you cross in most situations, right? If you cross the right line,
if you go the other way, you get penalized. Yeah.
but so it's an important thing, that goal line. But once you're over the goal, you're out of bounds, and there's no game going on there. So the extremes or the polarities are real enough, as you say, but the pendulum spends most of its time in the middle, not right on the 50-yard line.
Almost all of it,
but
actually.
Yeah, and the closer it gets to an extreme, the slower it goes, and the more the pull toward the other side. Or the relative position on a bar magnet. There's no place on the bar magnet that feels only the pull of one polarity but not the other. Right? It's all relative. It's all a matter of degree. The closer you get to one pole of the magnet, the stronger that field becomes, and the less influence the other polarity has, but there's always some influence. That's why I like the idea of seeing opposites initially as polarities that begs a middle, which is the whole magnetic field is the middle. We've got a positive pole, a negative pole, but we've got a third element in the middle. This is the heart and soul of all of the trinities in spirituality, and it includes everything else. It's all-inclusive. Harmony has to be all-inclusive. Plus, it feels good.
There's that.
I mean, there is such a thing as a melancholy victory, where you won, but you devastated somebody you care about. What kind of victory is that? Wouldn't you rather have the harmony of a 50-50 or a 60-40 or a 70-30, right, solution? You tell a story about resolving conflict where you, and I do the same thing in my relationship, we just put a number on it. We quantify it.
Yeah, how important is this to you on a 1 to 10?
But then you have that other rejoinder, where you say, well, in most cases, if it's a tie, I just yield to my wife because it's easier and I can handle disappointment in most cases better than she can, so fine.
No, it's not that. It's that I can handle my disappointment better than I can handle her disappointment.
Oh, that's better said.
it's really pretty selfish in that respect.
I wasn't allowing for her disappointment. That is a factor, too. So I think to underscore here the idea that either-or thinking, to believe you've only got all of this or all of that, black or white, right or wrong, good or bad, nothing in the middle, is related to overstimulation, to stress, to anxiety, to fear. And when you argue with somebody you love and you're afraid you're losing them because they're pulling away, or more than often you're pushing them away, isn't it funny? We push them away and then feel hurt that they're not close to us, right? But we don't know how else to behave. To understand that that's all a byproduct of an unconscious program that says where there's anxiety, there just might be danger. So get away, push away, even though it hurts, right? Push away, get away. I don't want to be here right now. I don't want to talk about it. I'm out of here. Don't let the door hit you in the rear end, all of that stuff.
That's the flight part of the fight or flight.
It definitely is. And so when we see that coming in a marriage or in any relationship, could be brothers and sisters or parents and kids, remind yourself, I'm going to, as I get more emotionally intoxicated here, and to me, that's what we're talking about, there is a drunkenness that goes with that level of fear and the anger that comes out of it that creates even more fear. Just know that you're going to tend to lose all the permutations, all the variations, all the combinations in the middle. See? And then you got to come back to the middle consciously. Even if it's just saying to yourself silently and internally, I've got more choices than two. I've got more choices than just these two. Anytime it seems like an either or, and that's all you've got, say, well, a list of two choices is not very long.
No, way too short. There's always a third, and if there's a third, there's got to be a combination of the first and the third, and the second and the fourth, and all kinds of possibilities from there on. And we have to take a look at the fact that part of our training is to see things as black or white or right or wrong. You know, like Santa Claus is going to find out who's naughty and who's nice. Now, not who's sort of nice and kind of naughty, or it's black or white. It's right or wrong. And we look at a thermometer and we see a 0 at the bottom and 100 at the top. Like that's the coldest it could get, or that's the hottest it could get. It's not. 0 at a thermometer is not anywhere near as cold as it could possibly get, and 100 is not even near as hot as it could possibly get. It's all relative, and we have to look at that we are trained not only through our genetics in that when it's life-threatening danger, choosing very quickly is really important. And if you only have two choices, you can make a faster choice, fight or flight, turn the wheel or slam on the brakes. So we're trained genetically, but we're also trained parentally to see things like you're a good boy or you're a bad boy. You're naughty or you're nice. This is the right thing to do. This is the wrong thing to do under every single circumstance. And we're not maybe capable as really little children of understanding the variations, but that imprinting is so strong that we tend to, especially as you said, when we get stressed, move into those extreme kind of thinking.
So let's make it really simple. Here's an easy way to remember what we're talking about. That the definition of the word heart and the derivation of the word soul are both center, the middle, the heart and soul of something. And the third way is the middle way. Okay? It's between the opposites. Not just the 50-yard line, but the full swing of the pendulum in all dimensions and to all degrees. You have two choices. There's got to be a third choice. Even a coin has an edge. Remember that Twilight Zone where they flipped a coin and it landed on the edge? Up a third way, whoever would have thought. You flip a coin, you don't say heads, tails, or the edge, right? And yet it's there. The bar magnet that so clearly has but two polarities. What could be more natural in this world than the nature of electromagnetic polarities? You'll only have two. You always have two. The charge is either positive or negative. But there's a magnetic field that is built out of the harmony of the way the positive interfaces with the negative. And that magnetic field unifies what appears to be opposites, you see. That's the middle way. That's the heart and soul. And so emotionally and spiritually, the antidote for this kind of fear-based thinking that can lead to hostility and even violence is to go to the heart.
Always to the heart. And, we could have started quite a while ago and done a really long audio journey, or we could wait a while and do a really short audio journey, but I think if we start right now, it's going to be just right. So why don't we do that? Why don't we talk about the middle way in the state of narrow awake, in the state of focused passion, in the place of paradise thinking, that place called the alpha brainwave state. And you always get there with one slow, conscious, deep breath. So take that breath, inhale, hold, And as you exhale, allow your eyes to close, allow your tension to release, and begin in your mind to find your place of perfect peace.
Make sure your shoulders are back and that you feel as if your head is balanced upon them. In this way, you can sit straight without being rigid. You can feel balanced and centered and allow yourself to become deeply relaxed from head to toe, on the outer skin wrapped around your body to the core skeleton and your sense of being at your very center, in all directions and in all ways. Feel safe now. Allow yourself to feel very, very relaxed. And you may even wish to imagine that you're in a beautiful garden, a paradise, an Eden of some sort, and you can wander because Steve's voice and my voice will guide you and bring you back. So feel free to go anywhere you wish, into those warm, sunny meadows, or this cool, enchanted forest over here, high in the mountain or deep in the valley. But hear the birds singing as you allow our voices to go with you, and hear the wind in the tops of the trees, even smell the fragrances of nature as you become even more and more relaxed.
And in this perfect place of peace, imagine taking a little walk to the sound of water that you hear running in the distance. And you're walking toward that sound of running water, a river, a gentle, calm, flowing river. And by the side of the river you see a canoe, and you realize somehow that you are an expert canoeist. And you get in that canoe, and you paddle out to the middle of the river, and you float down, gently, paddling occasionally, but the river's flow is taking you. But you notice as you start to go toward the edge, toward the sides, that you need to bring yourself back to the middle. You feel if you get too much in one direction or too much in another, a simple stroke will bring you right back to the center. It's easy to stay in the center. It's easy to stay focused. It's easy to float right down the middle. Because as you feel yourself moving away from center, the earliest you can catch yourself moving away, one stroke, and you're back on track. So when it's appropriate to move to the edges, when it's time to board or to leave, that's when you can move your canoe to the sides of the river. But when traveling forward is your path, and that's what you want to do, then find the groove. Find the place in the center where you go not too fast and not too slow. It all seems to flow.
Imagine you're in an art supply store and you're looking at a box of crayons, and here's a box that has 8 colors in it, and here's a box next to it with 16 colors. And way down on the end, here's a box with 128 colors. That's the one I want. That's the one I want. Because when I take it home and I open up this biggest box of crayons, all these different colors, I'm going to take out the black crayon, and I'm going to take out the white crayon, and I'll set one off to one side and one off to the other, but in the middle, I've still got 126 colors. In fact, if these were paints or watercolors instead of crayons, I could combine them and make thousands of colors. You see, my very first computer monitor had 8 colors. That was a big advance over a black and white computer monitor. Now, computers can generate literally tens of millions of colors. many more shades and hues than anyone could really appreciate or discern for themselves. But this is an allegory for solutions, for answers, for options and alternatives, for choices that conscious people can substitute for their knee-jerk reflexes and reactions. When we talk about staying in the stream, maybe off to one side, but you easily glide back toward the middle, and you may need to go over here to the other bank. But as Steve was saying, you can easily move right downstream, staying between the extremes of that river edge, those river banks. And with the colors, the same thing. We're talking about solutions and goals and desired outcomes, results that you get to choose in your life, but only if you know there's more than either or. There's always more than either or.
And whenever it feels like your choices are limited to two, then something at that moment you know you can do is stop and take a deep breath and look for solution 3. And if you allow yourself, that's what you'll see. And then come 4 and 5 and 6 and many more things from which you can pick. There's always choices if you allow there to be. One deep breath and you'll see. So, the middle way, most of the time, it's where you want to be. Out of the extremes, the black and the white, the right and the wrong, the good and the bad, the either and the or. There's room for that, but there's so much more in between. Ask yourself, what would Goldilocks do? This one's too hard and this one's too soft. I'm going to find the one that's just right for me. You find the one that's just right for you.
And whenever you find yourself disagreeing, especially with somebody that you respect and wish to treat with dignity, and should that not be everyone, to some relative degree anyway, stay off the poles, stay out of the absolutes by finding something redeeming, something of merit in the argument you disagree with so clearly, that you can acknowledge to make the other person feel heard and understood. It will also help develop your understanding of the bigger picture. For truth is a whole and complete thing. Truth is not found in the bits and pieces of life, or the fragments or shards of what's left after an argument, or something or someone has been defeated and conquered or vanquished. Truth is always found in the bigger picture. It's inclusive. It varies in degree. It's all relative. But truth is totality.
So know your own truth and know that it may be different than someone else's truth. Because what's right for you may not be right for them too. Not too hard, not too soft. Just right for you. So remembering the middle way as a choice, or many choices that you have to play. And when you find yourself in the black or white, take a deep breath. No, that's not right. There's more. There's more I can explore. I always have choices. That's the key. You always have choices. That's true reality. So with choices in mind, take a deep breath now and find it's easy to return. Be aware of your surroundings. One more deep breath. And as it feels comfortable, open your eyes and come back to wide awake.
Feeling fine, all rested and alert, and Boy, I always feel rich when I do an exercise like that. It's like, oh, there's so much more here. There's all this other stuff that I had overlooked because my fear that I had to be all this or all of that. I think a lot of folks would be happy to drop this whole either or, everything or nothing kind of mentality. Unless, as you indicated a couple of times, it's an important point. If we are in real, clear and present danger, not to worry, autopilot will take over. And those higher brain functions will become dormant for a little while. Think creatively later. There are times to shoot first and ask questions later, or at least run like hell and then assess whether there really was a gray area in the middle. But this is core to critical thinking in one very clear way, that the human kingdom stands above the animal and plant kingdom, even if only in this regard, that we have this second level of thinking. We can reflect upon our thinking, that many of us react like animals or plants, just reflexively, stimulus response, knee-jerk, and that it might even be good in a survival situation where the danger is real. Doesn't obviate the need for us to develop as human beings our abilities to discern, to find choices, to go beyond the obvious choices, to look for those permutations and combinations. What could be more enriching?
So remember, always in between, in the middle of stimulus and response, is the potential for perception. You have the ability to choose your attitude. You have the ability to choose how you see things, the point of view you want to take with them, and that's the power there in the middle. So always remember that these audio journeys are something you can use to take you to sleep at night. It makes a wonderful bedtime story and allows you to release your tension and anxiety, especially if you had a difficult day. And always remember, too, that these programs are available to be passed on to a friend. If you know somebody who'd benefit from the wisdom of the middle way, well, just go to the focusedpassion.com website and see our little send one to a friend gizmo and send it on to them. I did that yesterday to a friend. He said, I'm having trouble releasing some excess pounds. Can you help me? And I sent him our program on weight management.
It really works. Really valuable stuff. You know, Susan Boyle's YouTube video got 100 million hits within 7 days.
Wow.
There's a lot of power in putting links to Focused Passion in your emails, but it's so much easier if you just use the gadget that's already on the site. We'll send the email for you, and all you got to do is insert your friend's email address and their first name, and you can put a little message in there too if you want. It's easy peasy. Check it out at focusedpassion.com. Remember the ED, focusedpassion.com. And as always, be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. For Steve Snyder, this is Michael Benner. Aloha from Maui.